Different. In this session, we are going to discuss on the broad areas on biodiversity conservation, global common efforts. We are going to touch upon in this session about the emergence of global concern on biodiversity conservation and some convention or protocol related to biodiversity conservation and some of the major challenges. During the last few decades, we know that we are repeatedly discussing about the biodiversity depletion, and we also perceive this as a potential challenge to human well-being all over the world. As a response to this, efforts to conserve biodiversity have been observed at varying scale. Number of international conferences, particularly beginning from Stockholm Conference to Earth Summit. This important is that these two important conferences, Stockholm Conference and Earth Summit, they play a key role to evolve institutional or policy measures to conserve biodiversity. In 1972, the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm resolved to establish the United Nations Environmental Program, and it was happened during that decade in 1970s. After that, we know the World Commission on Environment Development, as we know as the Brundtland Commission, in 1987, it published its report, Our Common Future. And after that, all this report, convention, they call for a new era of environmentally sound economic development. After that, we have evidence with number of conventions and protocols related to conservation of biodiversity. And in addition to that, we have seen 1980s onward, even 60s, beginning from 60s, but you have seen the major effective implementation was happened from 1980s onward, like identification of biodiversity hotspot and mega biodiversity countries, and so on, that we have discussed in details in other session, last few sessions. When we talk about biodiversity-related convention, some of the international conventions that focus on biodiversity issues are the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, the World Heritage Convention, the International Plant Protection Convention, the International Whaling Commission. These are some of the important or very effective conventions related to biodiversity. If you look into those conventions related to biodiversity, it works to implement action at the national, regional, international level in order to reach shared goals of conservation sustainable use. In meeting their objective, means those conventions, the convention have developed a number of complementary approaches that are site-specific, species-specific, genetic resource and or ecosystem-based, and operational tools, for example, program of work, trade permits and certificate, multilateral system for access and benefit sharing, regional agreement, site listing, funds, etc. Then let us have a quick look into different convention protocol as a global common effort in conserving biodiversity. One of the important convention is Convention on Biological Diversity. As we know that in 1992, the largest ever meeting of world leaders took place at the United Nations Conference on Environment Development in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which is known as Rio Conference or Earth Summit. In that Earth Summit, two historic agreements were signed. One is the Convention on Climate Change, the other is the Convention on Biological Diversity. This Convention on Biological Diversity is the first global agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. And this Convention on Biological Diversity, as we also known as CBD, has three main objectives goals. One is conservation of biodiversity. Second is sustainable use of the components of biodiversity. And the third one is sharing the benefits arising from the commercial and other utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way. If you look into convention, this convention of biological diversity, it's a very comprehensive in its goals, and it deals with an issue so that we know that it is vital to humanity's future and that it stands as a landmark in international law for the conservation of biodiversity. For the first time, it recognized that the conservation of biological diversity is a common concern of humankind and it is an integral part of the development process. And that agreement covers all ecosystem, species, and genetic resources. Also links traditional conservation efforts to the economic goal of using biological resources sustainably. And the CBD sets principle for the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources, notably those destined for commercial use. It also covers the rapidly expanding field of biotechnology, addressing technology development and transfer, benefits sharing, and biosafety. One of the most important is the convention is legally binding. Countries that join it, CBD, are obliged to implement its provision. This CBD reminds all the decision makers that natural resources are not finite and sets out a new philosophy of the 21st century, that is of sustainable use. We have seen there are a number of past conservation efforts. They were aimed at protecting particular species and habitat, but this convention recognizes that ecosystem, species, genes, it must be used for the benefit of the humans. This can be done in a way that and at a rate that does not lead to the long-term decline of biological diversity. This convention also acknowledges that substantial investment are required to conserve biological diversity. And the basic argument of this CBD is that conservation will bring us significant environmental, economic, and social benefits in return. Next is that convention migratory species, as we call it as CMAs, which aims to protect those species of wild animals that migrate across or outside national boundaries. This includes conservation of terrestrial, marine, and avian species over the whole of their migratory range. The convention was concluded in 1979 and came into force on 1st November 1983. It is also known as Bonn Convention. Next is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. It is an international treaty drawn up in 1973 to protect wildlife against overexploitation and to prevent international trade from threatening species with extinction. The treaty entered into force on 1st July 1975. The other important convention is Ramsar Convention on Wetland of International Importance, which was signed in Ramsar, Iran in the year 1971, and it is an intergovernmental treaty that provides the framework for national action and international cooperation for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. The World Heritage Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage, also known as the World Heritage Convention, is also one of the important conventions related to conservation of biodiversity that was adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO in 1972 and one of the most universal international legal instruments for the protection of the cultural diversity and the natural heritage. Another treaty, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, with the objectives conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefit arising out of their use, in harmony with the Convention on CBD, means Convention on Biological Diversity for Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security. This treaty covers all plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, while its multilateral system of access and benefit sharing covers specific lists of more than 64 crops and forages. And one important objective of this treaty is, that is, the treaty also farmers' rights. International Plant Protection Convention is also one of the convention which was taken place in 1952, as it is also called as IPPC. This IPPC aims to protect world plant resources including cultivated and wild plants by preventing the introduction and spread of plant pests and promoting the appropriate measures for their control. The convention provides the mechanism to develop the international standards for phytosanitary measures, that is ISPMS, and to help countries to implement the international standard for phytosanitary measures, ISPMS, and the other obligations under the IPPC, means International Plant Protection Convention, by facilitating the national capacity development, national reporting, and dispute settlement. The International Whaling Commission of 1946, with the purpose to provide for the proper conservation of whale stock and thus make possible the orderly development of the whaling industry, is also one of the important convention or commission for conservation of biological diversity. The details of different convention which we have talked today, or more than that, you will find out that in this CBD website, www.cbd.int. You can explore there for further study. Here we are looking into a brief about to understand what are the existing important conventions related to biodiversity conservation. Many more conventions and protocols are there which is related to conservation of biodiversity. Of that, three important protocols needs to be understood, which is very important. That is the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur, that Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress to Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. These three convention protocols is very important. The Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing is an international agreement which aims at sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way. It entered into force on 12 October 2014. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity ensure the safe handling, transport and use of living modified organisms, also called, in short it says LMOs, that result from the modern biotechnology that may have adverse effect on biological diversity, taking also into account risks to human health. This Cartagena Protocol adopted on 29 January 2000 and entered into force on 11 September 2003. The third important protocol is Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress to Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which was adopted as a supplementary agreement to the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. The supplementary protocol aims to contribute the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity by providing international rules and procedures in the field of liability and redress relating to living modified organisms. Through this convention and protocol, we are trying the international community effort is going on to conserve biodiversity. In addition to that, we have seen many more activities under the umbrella of the United Nations. Some of them are, the first, you can see that we have International Day for Biological Diversity, which we celebrate or observe in 22nd May every year. You know how it was, how 22nd May is celebrated International Day for Biological Diversity. You know, the United Nations that proclaimed this day is International Day of Biological Diversity is to increase understanding and awareness about the biodiversity issues. When it was first created by the Second Committee of the UN General Assembly in late 1993, 29 December was celebrated as International Day for Biological Diversity. But in December 2000, the UN General Assembly adopted 22nd May as International Day of Biodiversity, as you know, to commemorate the adoption of the text of the Convention on 22nd May 1992 by the Nairobi Final Act of the Conference for the adoption of the agreed text of the Convention on Biological Diversity. It was difficult. Another reason is why we are adopting 22 May, celebrating 22 May instead of 29 December is that it was difficult for many countries to plan and carry out suitable celebration for the date of 29 December, given the number of holidays that coincide around that time of the year. So that's why we celebrate every year 22nd May as International Day of Biodiversity. Every year, different themes we celebrate under different themes. Recent one, 2020, the major theme was on Our Solutions Are in Nature. So starting from 2002, we have several different themes. In 2002, we have the theme of dedicated to forest biodiversity. 2003, it was on biodiversity and poverty alleviation challenges for sustainable development. Then in 2004, it was biodiversity, food, water, and health for all. 2005, biodiversity, life insurance for our changing world. And then 2006, protect biodiversity in dry land. 2007, biodiversity and climate change. 2008, biodiversity in agriculture. 2009, invasive alien species. 2010, biodiversity development and poverty alleviation. Forest biodiversity was the major theme in 2011. Marine biodiversity was the major theme in 2012. And so, in 2013, it was on water and biodiversity. And island biodiversity was the major theme in 2014. The major theme of 2015 was on biodiversity for sustainable development. And 2016, it was a mainstreaming biodiversity, sustaining people and their livelihoods. It was biodiversity and sustainable tourism in 2017 and 2018. Then that was celebrating 25 years of action for biodiversity. And 2019, our biodiversity, our food and our health was the major theme of International Day for Biological Diversity, followed by, as I mentioned, everybody knows the recent one that in 2020, it was Our Solutions Are in Nature was the major theme of International Day for Biological Diversity. We have celebrated 2010 as International Year of Biodiversity. It was a year-long celebration for biological diversity, and it's important coincidentally, it was coinciding with the date of the 2010 biodiversity target. That is, the year was declared by the 60th, that 2010 is a International Year of Biodiversity was declared by the 61st session of the United Nations General Assembly in 2006. It was meant to help raise awareness of the importance of biodiversity through activities and events to influence decision makers and to elevate biological diversity nearer to the top of the political agenda. And from 2011 to 2020, United Nations declared this decade as United Nations Decade on Biodiversity with the theme Living in Harmony with Nature. In October 2010, at the 10th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity in Nagoya, Japan, the government agreed to the strategic plan for biodiversity, that is from 2011 to 2020, and its IGNOU biodiversity target. So these plans provide an overarching framework on biodiversity, not only for the biodiversity-related convention, but for the entire United Nations system and all other partners engaged in biodiversity management and policy development. So to build support and create momentum for this urgent task, the United Nations General Assembly at its 65th session declared the period 2011-2020 to be the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity, with a view to contributing to the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity for the period 2011 to 2020. Then, In addition to that, many more initiatives has been taken at global level. One of them is Ipbs Initiative, that is Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service. It is an independent intergovernmental body established by the states to strengthen the science policy interface for biodiversity ecosystem service for the conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. It was established in the city of Panama on 21st April 2012 by 94 governments. It is not a United Nations body, but later on in the year 2013, at the request of the Ipbs plenary and with the authorization of UNEP Governing Council, the United Nations Environment Program provides secretariat service to the Ipbs. And we have talked about IUCN red categories, right, when we are talking about threats to biodiversity. So here, we'll see IUCN also category system for the protection of biodiversity. Of that, one of them is IUCN Protected Area Category System. And if we look into their initiative, we will find out that protected and conserved areas are the foundation of biodiversity conservation, and they follow they safeguard nature and cultural resources, improve livelihood, and drive sustainable development. That's why IUCN works to establish the best practices and standards that maximize the effectiveness of protected and conserved areas and advances justice and equity in conservation, including the right of indigenous peoples in local communities. This IUCN defines a protected area as a clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. This IUCN's program on protected areas has a long heritage in the Union with a headquarter-based core team and regional staff and a closely coordinated program of activities with the WCPA, means World Commission on Protected Areas. So the World Commission on Protected Areas, they expanded the definition or categories of that protected areas in six management categories. Subdivision. One is 1A, that is strict nature reserve, that is strictly protected for biodiversity and also possible geological, geomorphological feature where human vegetation use and impacts are controlled and limited to ensure protection of the conservation values. 1B, under 1B category, wilderness area. One is strict nature reserve, right? In strict nature reserve, then you can control, human can visit. In wilderness area, usually large unmodified or slightly modified areas, retaining their natural character and influence without permanent or significant human habitation, protected and managed to preserve their natural condition, right? The second category is national park, large near natural areas protecting large-scale ecological processes with characteristic species and ecosystem, which also have environmentally and culturally compatible spiritual, scientific, educational, recreational, and visitor opportunities. The third category is natural monument or features that set aside to protect a specific natural monument, which can be landforms such as sea, mount, marine cavern, geological features such as cave, or living features such as ancient grove, right, like sacred grove. The fourth category is habitat species management areas to protect particular species or habitats where management reflects this priority. Many will need regular active intervention to meet the need of particular species or habitat, but this is not a requirement of the category. And category 5, protected landscape or seascape, where the interaction of people and nature over time has produced a distinct character with significant ecological, biological, cultural, and scenic view, and where safeguarding the integrity of this interaction is very vital to protecting and sustaining the area and associated nature conservation and other values. Then Category 6, that is protected areas with sustainable use of natural resources, which conserve ecosystem together with associated cultural values and traditional natural resource management system. And generally you see large area mainly in a natural condition with a proportion under sustainable natural resource management, and where low-level non-industrial natural resources are used compatible with nature conservation is seen in one of the main aim of this particular protection of this area. And another category will see IUCN green list of protected and conserved areas. And these are new initiative of global common efforts for preservation and conservation of biodiversity. This IUCN Green List is a new global standard for protected areas. This list recognizes successes in achieving conservation outcomes and measures progress in effective management of protected areas. There are currently about 258,608 designated protected areas recorded in the World Database on Protected Areas. Most areas are on land and collectively protect about 20 million, approximately 20 plus 20.2 million square kilometer, which is equivalent to 15% of the Earth's land surface. And in that, in marine protected areas, despite being fewer in number, cover 27, this much area, about 7.6% of the world's ocean. However, if you look into marine areas, it can be looked into national jurisdictions, exclusive economic zone, 0 to 200 nautical miles, and they have significantly more protection, that is about 75%, than areas beyond national jurisdiction, that is, less greater than 200 nautical miles from the coast, with only 1.2% of the protection. So in this way, it is the global common effort for conservation of biodiversity, and we discuss about through different convention and protocol, and through revisiting and updating that and reassessing our progress towards direction. We are trying to improve, or we are trying to improve the practices, or trying to adopt more new practices for the conservation of biodiversity. So with this, these are a few of the references which I refer for this presentation, and I also suggest you can read into those references so that you can get more in depth into what I have discussed today. Thank you very much.